Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our podcast, Time to Talk About. Today, we're going to be talking about something that we have been wanting to discuss for a while, but just haven't gotten around to it. But we think it's very relevant to pretty much everyone. So, today, we want to talk about hustle culture, which obviously is very prevalent, in America. But I'm sure it is, you know, present all over the world. But since we live in America, I think we can mainly talk about it from the American standpoint. Um, in the description, we're going to leave, along with all our normal information, there's a link to this article that we will be referencing. It's from monster.com, which is like a career site, but it has a lot of good information. So I guess we can go ahead and jump in. According to this article from monster.com, definition of hustle culture is the mentality that one must work all day, every day in pursuit of professional goals. It's also known as burnout culture or grind culture. And obviously, when we're talking about hustle culture, we're not just talking about working hard, right? Because any goals or professional aspirations that you may have in life, it's never going to come by easy, right? You're going to have to work hard. So we're not talking just about working hard or making sacrifices or going the extra mile, but we're talking about the overworking or excessive working or the constant need to, to always be doing something, right? Some people call people workaholics, right? Who are working constantly all the time and cannot stop working. So that's what we're talking about here to clarify. What are your thoughts like when you think of hustle culture? What pops up in your mind, or what do you normally refer to?
Yeah, I think for me, I think of a lot of things. For one, I definitely um kind of view hustle culture at sometimes in more of a negative connotation. I know I'm the type of person that at least I would say I'm like a pretty hard worker. I don't really like people that are like aimless or don't really have goals. So I
Mhm.
understand the necessity um at least in my own life to work hard towards the goals that one has.
Yeah.
But the reason why I look at hustle culture in a way that's more negative is because when you look at it in a raw sense, it oftentimes tends to manifest in overworking yourself, right?
Yeah.
With little or no breaks. I mean, even this definition that we're looking at, um, and I'll repeat it, it says the mentality that one must work all day, every day in pursuit of their professional goals. Um, I have an issue with that because professional goals are really important, but
Mhm.
at the same time, if you never find time to actually enjoy the fruits of your labor,
Right.
what is it worth? You know what I mean? Life isn't all about having a name. Not to mention that if you are burning yourself out through not really taking many breaks, um, you likely won't be able to even get to the back half or even more of these professional goals that you've set for yourself. You know,
Yeah.
I am a firm believer in good time management. I don't think that prioritizing hustle culture is a good use of your time. I think working hard is, but I don't think that hustle culture, using all day, every day to have a name or a status, I don't really think that that's the best use of your time because you will become a shell of the person that you could be.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? Um, and I think the best resource in the professional environment is an individual that is well rounded,
Yeah.
not one that is only professionally oriented, right? In
Mhm.
many career paths, you need to learn how to be a people person. You need to learn how to network. You need to learn how to connect with people past spreadsheets and past sitting in front of a computer all day. And you can't really do that if you're in this office environment or in a workplace environment 24/7, making sure that your goals are the ones that take precedent over everyone else and everything else in your life in such a way that you really aren't growing and you're being stagnant. I don't know.
Yeah.
Like I think there's like a really like hard line to walk here because For me, I am a person that does believe in hard work. I do put my goals ahead of basically everything else. But I also find time to take breaks because you will burn out. Whether or not you think you'll burn out, it's just true that you will burn out sooner or later. And you'll end up hating what you do if you don't learn how to compartmentalize and manage your time in a way that is useful to you, you know?
Absolutely,
So it
yeah.
is an interesting line to walk, because I think if we're not careful, we can come off in a way that's like, "Oh, like, we're allergic to hard work," and that's not the case actually at
Mhm.
all here, you know? Yeah, those are my initial thoughts about hustle culture, especially considering, the amount of thinking that I've done about this topic in particular.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I think it is a very thin line between, okay, working hard and making those sacrifices and, putting your best foot forward and having that hustle culture. But I think talking about being a rounded human being is a big part of that. Um, you can't be a well-rounded human being if you're in work mindset all the time. And I think it's something a lot of people struggle with, even myself included. Like you said, you're a hard worker, I'm a hard worker, and I think sometimes you're so focused on something, and sometimes it has to do with your background too. For us as immigrant kids and other people as well, depending on their background, if especially if they came from a family that was poor or low income, that want to and drive to work hard to succeed and get to the top. It's kind of natural, right? It's kind of in you. It's hard to remove it, but if you're working to the point where you're not healthy, where you're not able to take the time you need. If you're not able to even take your mind off of work and when you're gonna get that next paycheck and thing, it can be very harmful to you and everyone around you. And, you know, history has shown that that doesn't even help you in the workplace. Like the best employees, the most productive and most successful employees are ones that are well-rounded. And I think sometimes that is easy to forget, for sure. So I completely agree, and I know, like, in the past, I have joked about, "Oh, I'm hustling, working hard." We always joke about, like, hustle culture, but I think we're coming to recognize, especially post-pandemic, where people are realizing that, like, it even non-salary jobs, right, even hourly jobs, even degree jobs, it doesn't really matter what type of job it is. We are realizing that employers are working us too hard for too little pay in most cases. And so I think as society, we're getting to this realization now where, like, okay, I need to do the job that I'm supposed to do and then go home and live a full rounded life and not be, trying to overexert myself anymore because these employers do not really care about us. All they care is that you're there to clock in and that you do the work so that they make their profit. So while I do believe a lot of it is on employers to change their ways and to make their workplaces more healthy, right? And to not encourage that kind of hostile behavior. At the same time, we as individuals also have to take that control and, put our foot down and say that, hey, we're going to leave work at work, let home be home, and be all around people as well, and not kind of succumb to that because a lot of times employers they ain't gonna do it for us. So the article also shared some interesting statistics, some I thought that would be great for us to go over. Most salaried Americans work over 45 hours a week at a full-time job. So off the bat, most people are working more than they're supposed to, right? The typical work week is 40 hours. Saying most people are working overtime, even if it's not official overtime, right? They're not getting paid for it, but they're just spending more time. Which when I was reading, I was like, "Oh, really?" Because I was like, I don't feel like that's me. But also, I think sometimes like you kind of slide into working over and you don't even realize it, right? Like when I was reading it, I was thinking, "Oh, I go to work like 9:30, 10, and I come back around 4." So I don't feel like I'm even hitting 40 hours sometimes. But I also sometimes come home and then log on and keep working like nothing happened. You know what I mean? And sometimes it has become like almost second nature. For context, I'm a software engineer. So sometimes, you're working on something, like you're working on coding a certain part of program, you want to get this part done. You're like, I just need to figure it out. And sometimes I'll come home and be like, it'll be like, 5:36, and I'll be like, oh, let me just work a little more so I can finish this. You're like, you're locked in. Next thing you know, it's 8 p.m. So it is actually very easy to especially if you have a job that is not something that you have to do in person that you can bring home. It is very easy to kind of go over that 40 hours a little bit, just 1 hour here, and then by the end of the week, you've gone over, you know, which is, I know for me personally, I've been trying to be better about it. I talk about it with my teammates all the time. I'm trying to be like, okay, when I get home, do home things, focus on other things. Like sometimes you don't need to get everything done that day, you know, but it is difficult for real.
Yeah, I mean, work, I'm sure work is hard. You know what I mean? I don't I don't know what it's like to be obviously what it's like to be a software engineer, because I'm not necessarily one. But from what I do understand, according to you, and other individuals, um, like it has the potential to be like very hard work. And I feel like unless you're taking the time to recharge, um, just like in any other field, you won't necessarily last, you know? I find it interesting how sometimes you come back home and you log right back on as if nothing happened. That's really interesting to me because for me, I'm trying to, or I feel like I associate a home with a a general attitude of like relaxation because that is your own place. You know what I mean? It's your own place where you can feel safe. Essentially, like for lack of better terms, do what you want. And for me, relaxation, that's kind of the definition of relaxation. Putting yourself in a safe space that does not stress you out, where you're allowed to do basically whatever you want. The fact that you come back home after hours and keep working is very interesting to me because when do you get a chance to actually just exist in your home? You know what I mean? Um, I think this first point about how
Mhm,
most salaried Americans work um, overtime by basically by default in their full time jobs is really interesting to me because I don't really think I mentioned this on here, but if you know me in person, this is something that I talk a lot about. My goal is to become a physician. I want to go into either family medicine or emergency medicine. So I really want to be a doctor.
mhm,
And in doing my research about the field, I have seen like a lot of things about the journey to becoming a doctor that are honestly kind of shocking.
mhm,
One of which has to do with these really long work weeks that make 45 hours a week sound minuscule at best. Especially in your residency. After your residency, I understand that things can get better when you're an attending, you finish all of your training, things can get a lot better. Um, especially if you pick a specialty that is not very grueling. But residencies, which are like you are a fully licensed, well, you are a doctor,
mhm.
but you're still undergoing training in your specialty. So you're done with school, but you're still like learning copious amounts of information. It is not uncommon for individuals, especially in surgical residencies, to work 80-hour work weeks plus. I've heard in some places it's 100 hours. And there are like rules that have often been bent that limit the amount of hours a resident can be in their hospital or in their
Mhm.
facility. Um, you know, just for the books, just so it looks okay. But
Yeah,
they're often bent.
right.
And honestly, this really long work week, 20-hour, I don't know, 20-hour plus days, but 12-hour days, 13, 14-hour days, if not even longer. Um,
Yeah, it'd have to
that's
be
kind of
12
what
hours
gave
at least, right?
you have to do
A
12 hours at
day.
least if you're going to get to 80 plus, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
That's
which is
what
a
gave
lot.
these really long work weeks are what gave residents their name. Because if you think about the term resident, It means someone that lives in a certain place. So it's almost as if
Oh,
they're living. Yeah, that's how they got their name. It's
I
almost as
never
if they're
even thought
living.
about it that way. Yeah.
Yeah, and so like for me, I still really want to go into the field. That's not like enough to deter me from going to it. Like again,
Mhm.
like I'm willing to like work hard for that. But I think that it's something that I'm aware of because the American medical system is very well aware of the fact that there is a shortage of doctors. And that's
Mhm.
due to many factors. Number one, it can be really difficult to get into a medical school. Number two, medical school can be very, very difficult and very, very grueling. I mean, it's medicine. You have to know a lot. That kind of comes with the title, you know what I mean? It just makes sense. That's
Mhm.
fine. But a third thing is that residencies are very, very, very grueling. So you'll see people that drop out of their residency don't even really want to go into it, even after going into debt and finishing 4 years of um of med school. So when you brought that first point up about how these work weeks are extremely, extremely long, that's the first thing that came into my mind because I know that
Mhm.
that's gonna be something that will likely be a reality for me because it's still something that I really, really I'm still motivated to do it, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I do think that there should be better working conditions for, people that are aspiring physicians, especially considering the idea that physicians also don't really get paid that much, given the amount of money that they're paid. Sometimes if you look at it on paper, you're like, "Okay, that's not too bad," depending on where you are and what you're doing and how long you've been a
Mhm.
resident. But thinking about the amount of hours that they are in the hospital, you can sometimes chalk it up to $3, $4 an hour because
And their
they've
student
been
loans. I
exactly,
feel
and
like we
their
never
student loans,
factor student
you
loans
know?
into doctor payment
Exactly,
because the
and so
number
it's
is
like,
big on paper.
yeah, the number is big on paper, and obviously a lot of people will make enough to pay it off, but it is something that is very grueling, and so I think that this example that is very pertinent to me is a reason of why hustle culture can be very, very toxic. Like, it is,
Mhm.
whether we like it or not, part of the reason why a lot of people are shying away from going into medicine. It's part of the reason that we do have a shortage of doctors, and we know that doctors are really, really important. Um, so there are implications further than just what's on like a sheet of paper, further than just some statistics, right? Like this is something that actually affects individuals.
Mhm.
Um, so I feel like for me, knowing that there's a doctor shortage is part of the reason that I want to go into the field. Um, but familiarizing myself with the statistics and understanding why things are the way they are has also been a really enlightening experience for
It's
me because
eye-opening. Yeah.
it shows me that in a lot of specialties there are really high rates of burnout, and
Mhm.
I definitely need to learn how to manage myself you know, so I don't overwork myself and take something that I'm passionate about and throw it away just because I'm burned out. Um, so yeah, and this is like I feel like this is not an isolated thought process.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely.
I know a lot of people think of this as well, and um, I think that sometimes professionals in the field kind of see this really grueling residency, 80-hour work week, 60 more hour work weeks, right? They kind of see that as like almost like a rite of passage because a
Mhm.
lot of people have had to go through it, and you do have to make sacrifices to become a physician. That's something that I'm very well aware of. I think anything that you're working hard for, you're going to have to make sacrifices. Making sacrifices and hustle culture are not the same thing, right? I think hustle culture
Yeah.
is unreasonable, whereas making a sacrifice is um it can be very reasonable. You know what I
Yeah,
mean? Um, but I think that sometimes in this situation, it might be taken a little too far, like
for
how
sure.
much are we going to honor this as like a rite of passage such that people continue to give up on their dreams of going into this field, such that this shortage continues to worsen, or such that people, continue to unalive themselves because they just can't do it.
Yeah.
So there are implications that we definitely need to think about when we talk about this topic of hustle culture. As important as it is to pursue your goals and as much as it means to me, you know, there is some stuff that you need to stand your ground on. And you need to understand, hey, if I continue going down this road of not prioritizing my self-care, you will not make it. You just won't make it.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's my 2 cents.
And remember to just to be clear, like, it doesn't end after school, right? After medical school. Part of the reason we have such a huge doctor shortage and nurses shortage is because a lot of doctors and nurses are just quitting because of the burnout. Well, as one reason, there's a lot of reasons doctors are quitting and nurses are quitting too. Some are unrelated as well. I know a lot of doctors and nurses feel like the medical systems in this country are not focused on patient care anymore, and they're just about making money too. And some people just don't feel like working to support all that. So that's a factor too. But especially nurses, we saw that a lot in the pandemic where a lot of them were quitting just because, you know, they were already overworked, but the pandemic just brought it to a new level and they're just like, we just can't do it anymore, you know? And so it is scary because obviously our hospitals, our clinics, that might be the most important field of work that we need. People are always going to be sick, you know? So it is very worrying. I mean, and we're seeing similar things in other disciplines, like with teachers, right? Teachers are quitting left and right because they are overworked, burnt out. They're expected to do so many things, and then the pay doesn't match what they're expected to do too. And so we are seeing a shortage there as well. So it definitely has much bigger implications than just individuals, you know, like individual negative effects on your life because of hustle culture. If we're not careful, it can definitely, you know, negatively affect our whole society. And I think in some ways it already has, especially when you look at mental health and how that is connected to all of this, which it's really sad. But yeah, when you were talking about, you know, the residents and their hours while being in residency, I was just trying to do the math. Like 12 working 12 hours in one day is already insane in general. That's why the standard work week is 40 hours. Most people work 8 hours a day. So the fact that for the norm in medicine is already 12 hours is a lot. But 12 times 7 is what? 84? So that means either they're working at least 12 hours a day every day to get to 80 hours, or they're working more than 12 hours a day for not every day, which either way you slice it is way too much, you know? And you have to think too about how is somebody's brain going to be functioning if they've been working for 12 hours nonstop, right? Especially in a field like medicine where, you know, you need your mind, right? You
Yes.
need to make important decisions because people's lives are in your hands, right?
Mhm, mhm.
I'm skipping ahead a little bit, but one of the points here talks about how um do 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 I am losing it. But there's a point talking about how studies have found that it actually reduces people's overworking actually reduces people's productivity
Yes.
in the long term. Oh yes. Overworking is detrimental to companies. This is a quote from the article. Employees who work long hours tend to sleep less, make more mistakes, and end up costing businesses more in health insurance, high turnover, and sick days. So that's true, obviously, generally in any field. You know, if you are not sleeping well, you're extremely tired, you're not going to do best work. And a lot of people not doing their best work can compound and actually make issues for a company. And of course, in the situation with health, it's so much more um serious. Um it's a shame, really.
Yeah, it is, and number 1, I like the fact that you brought up, teachers as well,
Mhm.
because I know that a lot of teachers, especially working in lower education, go above and beyond, to, um to make their classrooms be like a safe space, or to really they really give their all into their job, and sometimes it's like they're not really fairly compensated for that. And I feel like that is like much less part of like hustle culture, more so part of how like a bigger issue of how a lot
Mhm.
of people in a lot of industries are simply not being fairly compensated for their work. They're simply not being treated fairly, and that kind of goes hand in hand with hustle culture, because if you're participating in a culture like this and you are, you know, overworking yourself for an institution or institutions that are not fairly compensating you or treating you well enough for your work, then again, you're not going to last in this field. You know what I mean? So,
Mhm.
just as much as we need to work on our perception of hustle culture, I feel like we also need to work on how these institutions are treating their workers, you know. And then as for the residency thing too,
Mhm.
I think in my mind, I think that there's like a pretty there's like a logical fix to that situation, like the whole burnout situation and the 80-hour work week. It's not always 80 hours. Sometimes like it's less. Sometimes it's more, but sometimes it is less. Um, in residency specifically, right? There is like a logical solution to that. And I think that it would be to make it such that medicine is a field that more people can get into, because
Mm.
it's an extremely difficult field to actually be able to break into
Yeah.
as a physician specifically, right? And if we had more physicians available, it's much less likely that people would have to be burning themselves out
Yeah.
in these super, super long work weeks, you know what I mean? And I think that that portion of like this solution kind of connects to hustle culture being prevalent as a student as well. Because I think that up until now, we've spoken about it in the sense of like the corporate world.
Mhm.
And
Working.
first, you talked about your experiences as a software engineer. Then I spoke about what I know about going into medicine. Um, but I think it can also happen when you're still in school, right? Um, I'm an undergrad, you've been through undergrad, you're in graduate school. I'm going to go to graduate school, hopefully. And even if you're going to a PhD program, right? You're basically working, but I guess you're still considered a student. Hustle culture is very prevalent there as well because people are very aware of these barriers that exist if you're trying to get into a competitive field. I think maybe for computer
Mhm.
science, it's really trying to lock in and make sure you get an internship, right? There, I know my friends are working around the clock. They're trying to make sure they have jobs lined up for them, or else they won't be able to be successful in their field, right? I have a lot of friends that are in my situation or are pursuing the same thing I'm pursuing, you know, and I think everyone knows that being a pre-med is it's probably the most exhausting thing I've done, but it's also one of the most rewarding things I've done too, honestly. Like I like it. I really do like it a lot. But there's so in both of our fields, there's so much room for burnout as a student, you know? And if you burn yourself out as a student, you will never be able to accomplish these professional goals that you esteem so highly, right?
Mhm.
And I'm really trying to remember that. I think a microcosmal example of this is in maybe preparing for a test as a student, right? I've pulled several all-nighters preparing for tests, and I can guarantee you that not even one has been worth it. Not even one. Honestly, I believe that some of them actually made me do worse on the exam that I would have done
Mm.
if I had just gone to sleep. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But it's because we allow our professional goals to intimidate us, right?
Yeah.
And so, you know, we feel like we have to actively hurt ourselves in order to pursue these professional goals. But it's like you won't get there if you're hurting
Yeah.
yourself, you know? As I think being a student can be very draining.
Yeah.
For me, I know despite this conversation, like I've said a million and one times, I'm a pretty goal-oriented person. This past weekend, I slept a lot. This is a long weekend, so I slept a lot. I went out. I I celebrated my friend's birthday with him. Couple of days ago. Oh, actually, that was yesterday, right? And basically, I used this weekend to relax because I was so exhausted for the previous week. And it's really interesting because the entirety of today, first of all, yesterday, I did do a good amount of schoolwork, a couple of hours worth actually.
Mhm.
And today I've done a little bit of schoolwork as well. But for the most part, this is a weekend of relaxation for me. And what I can't get out of my mind is the fact that I felt now it's the end of this weekend. I felt bad. Like I actually felt bad not being in my books 24/7. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And that's an issue, right? It means that I'm allowing my professional goals to intimidate me so much so that I don't want to take time off from the books. I don't want to take time to recharge, or I feel bad doing so. And that should never, ever, ever be the case,
Mhm.
right? As important as my professional goals are to me, I also have to have a life to a certain extent as well,
Yeah.
right?
And that's a
Um,
common symptom, right, of hustle
yeah,
culture, whether it's work or school. Kind of like you're always thinking about, even when you're doing things, even when you're supposed to be spending time with family or friends, you think about, oh, I should be studying, or oh, I could be working on something so I could, you know, get this done and hit this goal so I could press my boss or whatever it is. Yeah. So I think many people can relate to that if we be honest, right?
yeah, sorry, I was having issues with my mic. But yes, I think a lot of people can relate to that, you know. I've spoken to people that feel the same way whenever they do things like that, you know.
Yeah.
And obviously there have been other times where I've had to cut things out for a good amount of time to make sure that I get good grades, or get myself in certain spaces, and it's been
Of
worth it,
course. Yeah.
right? And I don't
Hmm.
think that those situations are consistent with hustle culture. I think that's more so that sacrificing that we were talking about earlier. Um, but um, I feel like you should not feel bad to take time for yourself and for your friends within reason. You know, I
Yeah.
think that the point that you made about our experience being immigrant children is a good one as well, because I know that there are expectations there. Our parents always valued education and professionalism. That's something that they did a very good job of supporting. My parents, anytime we needed something for school, they made sure we had it. To this
Hmm.
day, they still do it. You know what I mean? I remember my laptop was having issues with it a couple of months ago. And I had to pay maybe like $100 to replace it, not replace it, but to fix it. Um, and that was much better as compared to the amount that I thought I would have to pay. I thought I'd have to pay maybe 1,000 plus. Um, and I knew that I wouldn't need a new laptop after going and getting the issue checked. As soon as I was just talking to my parents about it that week, and because I was frustrated, you know, it was an inconvenience for me, especially being a student. I use my laptop every day.
Right. Yeah.
Um, so I was just opening up to my parents and telling them about my frustrations for that week, and they were like, "Oh, do you need us to buy you a new laptop?" And I was like, "What? Like, no, you don't need to do that." I was very grateful, of course. I was like, "Oh, I
Yeah.
appreciate
Yeah.
that, but no, you don't need to do that. It's $100. I'll pay it. I'll replace it." I'm just frustrated because it means I have to get this new laptop, and
Hmm.
it just put me behind a little bit, you know?
Sometimes it's more about
Um,
the inconvenience. You know,
yeah, it's more so
money
about
is
the
always a struggle,
inconvenience.
but it's like the time that it takes out of your day from doing things. Time is also money.
Mhm.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Time is also money, you're right. And so, like, to that end, my parents have always been individuals that value education and professionalism. Um, and that's obviously great, so do I. Um, but I think that sometimes, like, we all kind of glorify hustle culture
Hmm.
because you and I know, like, for example, like, where our parents came from and the sacrifices that they've had to make such that we can go to school here, in the US, and hopefully get stable jobs and make something of ourselves, right? So I feel
Yeah.
like having that background and knowing this stuff and being sensitive to that stuff, it really kind of instills hustle culture in us, you
Yeah.
know? Especially because I feel like our parents pretty much they had to, you know, they felt like they almost had to participate in hustle culture just to make it. I feel like our parents have worked very, very, very hard, and seeing their hard work and what they've done for us, it's kind of instilled that in us too.
Yeah.
So, I don't think we're the only people in that situation. All this is to say that sometimes hustle culture or participating in a culture like that at a level that is toxic to yourself is not necessarily something that you even inherently choose to do.
Absolutely.
Therefore, it is something that you need to at times understand that it's something you might need to unlearn, you
Mhm.
know?
Especially in
Um,
this country, where so
yeah,
many
yeah.
people are struggling. Sometimes, especially when you're an immigrant and you first come here, sometimes you don't have a choice. You just got to lock in and do it because how else are the bills going to be paid, you know? Um, so I totally agree with that. I think where we struggle as Americans and people in general sometimes is we're always hungry to get the next thing, next thing. Even when we get to that point where we've arrived or where we've gotten ample success where we're able to comfortably provide for ourselves, comfortably provide for our families, etc. Then we still want to get the next thing, right? People are always thinking about, oh, what's the next job I can get that I'll get paid even more? Or what's the next, how can I work so hard to impress my bosses so I can get another promotion, so I can get to the C level? Or maybe so I can start a new company or I can get this, go back and get this degree, right? I want to go back and get an MBA so that I can do this, right? Like we're always thinking about like what is the next. And this is something that I've thought about in my life a lot. Like, at one point, do we just chill and be like, okay, I've achieved enough. I don't need to be chasing the next thing and next thing. If the opportunity comes, and it makes sense and I can do it with that proper life balance, then sure, why not? But sometimes it's like, and it's very hard for us as Africans, right? And I'm sure people of many other backgrounds and cultures, because your family and your friends in those African circles, they always want you to go and get that next thing, get to the higher thing, right? For some, it can almost be I guess it almost gives them a sense of pride, right? And they have bragging rights, right? But realistically, sometimes it's like, you have enough, right? That's the thing I think about with like being rich. We all want to be rich, right? I always say I want to be wealthy. I want to be comfortable, right? But at what point do you realize that it's like, okay, I actually have enough money to live comfortably. I don't need to be chasing for more. You know what I mean? That's when you go from wealthy to the 1%, I feel like. And that's when you start getting into the gray area of like, I feel like people who have those exorbitant amounts of money, they're not doing everything by the book to get there. There's always something a little shady, always something a little unethical, even if it's not illegal, right? And so I think that's so important, right? We always want to work hard. You always want to. It's not that we shouldn't have goals and shouldn't challenge ourselves to get to the next level, right? But at what point does it become you're just chasing things to chase, right? Which is very, it can get very, very toxic for sure. And I did want to point out too, because we were talking about college, right? And hustle culture, being a student, especially once you get to college, it's very, I think, relevant to all college students, right? No matter what you're pursuing, there's struggles and pressures in that program. And a lot of times, in general, as college students, we kind of feel this need where we're always chasing the next thing, right? People always chase, okay, I want to get that scholarship, or I want to get into this extracurricular program, or work with this professor, right? You're always trying to be like, what extra things can I do during my time in college so I can add that to my resume, right? So it can hopefully help me get a job or get a better job, right? Even in general as a college student, right? You're always trying to be like, "Oh, how can I get involved?" Which is, it's all good and it's all important. And it's not like you should just be sitting there doing nothing, just schoolwork. But at the same time, it can become too, right? You're trying to chase, chase, chase. And it can become, very unhealthy, you know? So I think that's something we all have to be aware as too as college students. But it is harder for sure, like you said, when you're in certain fields that are very competitive. I think we all know the medical field, whether it's medical school, being a physician, whether it's nursing, a lot of medical professions are extremely competitive. And I think actually, now that we've been talking about it, I think we need to have an episode where we specifically talk about the medical school process, because I think people are kind of coming to the realization now that we're kind of making it so difficult and so exclusive to the point where it's feeding into the shortage that we're having. It may not be the primary cause, but it's exacerbating the situation, right? Why are programs only accepting 3 people for their I've never understood that, like, for their residency or whatever it is. Right? Like, I understand the air of exclusivity, and also that you need to pick the people who are going to be serious and be the best. Obviously, we understand all that. It's not like open the floodgates to everybody, but it's like at some point we need to look at that really, because you keep saying, "Oh, there's shortage," and then what are you doing to address that shortage? So I think maybe that's something we should explore as a future topic. on its own because there's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah, I mean, I agree 110% with that. Really, with all of what you said. Um, but yeah, I'll start with like what you said last, and I'll get into a couple of things that you said earlier. Um, I understand exactly where you're coming from. Where you like when you're talking about how like med school admissions and the difficulty of making it there um is to a certain extent contributing to the shortage that we have. Because not only are a lot of people being turned away from medical schools and residency programs, I have met so many people here in undergrad that don't even want to attempt it because they don't think that they'll get in, you know? And for me, my thing is don't close the door on yourself before you've even entered the room. You know what I mean? But I completely understand why some individuals might do that when it seems very, very, very daunting, you know?
Absolutely.
For
Yeah.
me, I'm the type of person that's like, okay, if I don't, I need to at least try. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? But not everyone is like that. Some people like knowing where they're going, you know? And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that. Um, I think what you were saying earlier about everyone always being focused on the next step is something that is extremely um pertinent to me as an individual, and I think a lot of other people too, because it is something that I have struggled with a lot, especially being um in college over maybe sophomore year, even up until now. Um, and I think that one thing that I'm realizing for me, I'm like Christian. If you're listening to this and you aren't Christian, that's fine. But that's just the way that I deal with that. I think the way that I'm learning how to deal with that, those thoughts and how they make you feel incompetent sometimes, is that is by understanding that you are more than likely in a position where you used to pray that you would be.
Hmm.
Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And I think that's important because that sometimes we're so focused on the next step that, like I said, number one, it can make you feel incompetent, but also it can make you forget about everything that you've been able to accomplish thus far.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like I used to pray that I would be in college, learning something that I enjoyed. You know, I used to pray that I would be doing well in college and I wouldn't be failing out of my classes in college. And I'm there, you know.
Yeah.
I remember last semester there was a certain summer program I wanted to get into, and I was praying and freaking out and hoping I got into it. And I got into it. I did it. It was a good experience. I learned a lot. Um, great, you know. But I remember being in that program, and I was like, okay, I need to be planning for what I'm going to do when I get back to school. And you should be a planner. Being a planner is great.
Yeah.
But I don't think that I ever took the time to reflect on everything I had accomplished in my
Hmm.
undergraduate career up until that point. Do you see what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah.
And I don't think I took the chance to really thank God for being with me every step of the way and opening certain doors for me, you know?
A
At
hundred
least
percent.
me as a
Yeah.
Christian, that's how I kind of rationalize these situations. I think it's important to be, for the millionth time, it's important to be goal oriented. There's absolutely nothing wrong with being focused on your next steps,
Hmm.
right? But you also need to learn how to be content with where you are. I think that because we are oftentimes so focused on leveling up, we don't do we don't give all that we can to where we are right now,
Yeah.
right? Maybe you are so focused on getting a certain experience on your resume that you neglect the people around you, right? I think there's so many opportunities for community service, for example, in these locations that we're in, that certain opportunities have given to us, right? But because we want to learn this skill or learn that skill, within where we are right now, we'll kind of ignore a great opportunity to give back like that because we're like, oh, in 2 years I want to be here, you
Yeah.
know. I know for me, in a couple of years, I do want to be going into medical school. and that's something that is on my mind literally all the time. I'm constantly thinking about, okay, how am I going to get in? Especially knowing how competitive it is, just like you were talking about. I'm like, how will I get in? How will I stick out? A, B, C, and D.
Yeah.
But I forget that I could have such a profound impact on the university that I'm going to right now.
Yeah.
I could actually have real impacts on real people. But excuse me, because I'm so focused on what's next, I'm neglecting what's right in front of me, right? There are doors on this campus that I feel like God has brought me to and will open up for me if I'm willing to open my mind up to the people around me instead of constantly looking at what is up. So yeah, I feel
Yeah.
like I'm just trying to learn balancing the two out, like enjoying where I'm at right now and being proud of myself and feeling like I am enough where I am right now while simultaneously preparing for my future.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I think there's two sides to this, there's two sides to this for sure.
I'm glad you shared that because I relate deeply, and I think that is something everyone can relate to, whether you're a person of faith or not, because we're all so focused on the next thing, on our goals, right? And sometimes you get focused on that where you know you want to be, and also the present issues and obstacles that are preventing you from getting there. That it's so easy to forget about how far you've come, you know, and to be hard on yourself, you know, and sometimes not give yourself the props for how much you have accomplished. And so that's something for me, definitely as a Christian in my own life, I have reflected on a lot, especially as we came to the end of the year and enter this new year. Like, it's so easy to forget how far God has brought us, right? And that we didn't do this on our own strength, but we did work hard, and that hard work and determination has brought us to this point. It's not like we were just plopped in this point and now we need to work hard and look forward to the goal. We've accomplished things to get here, and we thank God for that. But it's so true that sometimes we have to pause and take a minute to kind of smell the roses, right? And to be proud of where we are, to enjoy, what we have accomplished. And then to sort of take that energy and bring that into what we're looking forward to. I remember a few months ago I saw a TikTok that was really funny. That was this guy was saying how it was basically like when you're crying about going into the job that you begged God for a year ago. And then he was in the car screaming and crying. And it made me laugh, but it is so true because it's so easy sometimes to forget to be grateful, right? For me, working a 9 to 5, there's so many days you don't want to get up and go in. And I'm like, oh my God, I don't want to go. I'm so tired, right? But in reflecting over the past year, I'm like, remember when I applied for that job and I was praying to God, like, if this is for me, Father, give it to me, open the doors, because I don't see a way. I didn't think I was adequate enough. I didn't think I was competent enough. I didn't think I was, what's the word? Qualified enough. And, like, the way I was praying for the job, and now it's the same job, I'm like, "Oh, I gotta go." And even when I started the job, right, like, this next month will be 1 year since I started this job, which is crazy how much time has flown. But even when I started, I was already thinking like, "Okay, I'm gonna work in this job, I'm gonna do my best, I'm gonna work for a little while, and then I'm gonna move to somewhere else that I wanna work." Like, I'm already thinking about, like, where's the next place I wanna be, So, over like the holidays, I was thinking of reflecting a lot about what I want 2024 to be, and my career goals and aspirations. And that was kind of the realization where it's like, okay, I need to focus this year on just being the best employee and best teammate and best software engineer I can be. And while I still need to keep my goals in mind and want to continue moving forward, let me take a minute and enjoy where I am, but also try to do the best where I am, right? And not just be so focused on when am I going to leave, when am I going to get out, right? So I think that's so important, and I'm sure we can all relate to that to a degree. Sometimes we have got to take a moment and be in the moment, and appreciate what we have gotten so far. Um, it's really important, and I think if we can do that, it will even help us as we plan for those goals in the future. Um, I did want to jump back really quick to something you said earlier, because we were talking about, you mentioned like kind of having that separation between work and home, which is something I've always, ever since I started college, I've always, really appreciated having. Like, I always tried to keep school and home separate. Like, when I first started college and I was a commuter student, so I always tried to do all my work at school in the library, and then even if I was coming home late, then come home, because it's like I kind of wanted home just to be the place where I rested, slept, chilled, spent time with family, etc. Right? And it is a big part of why now, like, I really do like living on my own. It's not just about the independence. Being a software engineer and being in a field where you do work from home, sometimes it's not like you just do your job and you come home and that's the end of it. Your home also is a place of work. So it's nice to like have your own place where you work sometimes. And then when you come home to be with your family, to your parents' house, then it's just home. I've always liked having that you know, delineation, but a lot of times it's hard to explain that to parents, right? They don't really get that, especially if they're in a field where they do work and they come home. Their work doesn't come home with them. So I definitely like relate to that, and that's why like I'm really trying to sometimes to just put the work down when I get home, leave the laptop closed, because I'm very fortunate that the position I'm in, I don't have to come home and keep working. Sometimes I feel like I have to, because sometimes, oh, I want to get to a stopping point. I want to figure this out. Sometimes there is a lot of pressure too. Sometimes we may be pressured to, oh, okay, we need to get this done by a certain deadline. So in that case, occasionally I may be like, okay, I really need to work because I need to get this done. I'm not gonna have enough time tomorrow, right? That's different. That's like a one-off thing. But generally, I'm not in a position where I need to be working outside of business hours, right? Which is it is actually not the case for a lot of software engineers. A lot of software engineers work overtime, even ones that are not paid overtime. A lot of software engineers work on the weekends, especially if you're in these big tech companies or if you're on a development team that is working on a specific, thing, right? Like there are definitely people in not on my team, but in my greater division that I work in that do work on the weekends sometimes, right? They do work overtime to make sure, the app and everything is running as it's supposed to. I'm blessed and I'm not one of them. So, because I'm at this point where I don't need to, I do want to make sure I kind of appreciate that and take advantage of that. And so when I come home, I'm able to be adult, do my dishes, do normal adult things, and kind of have that whole around life. And like you said, the social aspect is very important too, right? We need to be able to network and connect with our colleagues and of course just our friends and our community outside of work as well. It's more important than we act like it is sometimes. But yeah, I thought that was a very great point you brought up as well, for sure.
And I I think that we need to understand what we define success as
Hmm.
well. Um, I know, like, I definitely want to like have money,
Yeah.
like for sure. I don't think there's anything wrong with um defining success by
Hmm.
or as making a lot of money in part, right?
Hmm.
But one thing that I'm really realizing is although I want to eventually at least make enough money to support myself, my family, maybe hopefully my parents as well, right? Um, I am realizing that my definition of success also includes the impact that I have on other people,
Hmm.
right? And I think that internalizing hustle culture can almost force you to only consider money in your definition of success, right?
Yeah.
And if no shame if you are in something for the money, right? Like at the end of the day, we don't gotta lie and be like, okay, like I'm the only reason I have a job is to like serve someone else, or like we don't have to lie. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like none of us would be going to college if we didn't want at least the opportunity to make enough money to really live life
Hmm.
eventually, right? Um, But like I said, you can't only define success as that, or maybe you can. But for me, I can't. I feel like that doesn't fulfill me as an individual too. And
You
I
won't be
think,
fulfilled, like, you won't be happy. It can be already
yeah,
success, but there's so many people who are successful because they have a lot of money, but are they
yeah.
really happy?
I feel like a lot of them, oh, not the siren. Um, I feel like a lot of them probably aren't. Now, my thing is, I don't really like it when folks are like, "Oh, money doesn't buy happiness," because I think I would be a lot happier. I'd be a lot happier if I had some money in my bank account. I won't lie, but also in addition to that, money might not necessarily buy happiness, but it can allow you to have certain experiences that can make
Hmm.
your life better. For example,
Absolutely.
traveling to certain places, right? You can't travel if you
Hmm.
don't have money, right? So money is essential to survival, and it's also essential to living too.
Agreed. Yeah.
Um,
We don't have to
but there's so
pretend like
much
it's
more
not.
to life, right? There's so much more to life than just money.
Yeah.
And prioritizing hustle culture, I feel like, only speaks for the aspect of life that is monetary.
Hmm.
And I just don't think that that's complete, you know?
For some people, it may not be money, right? It may be status or prestige or power. That's another thing too, right? That people want to have the status of having a lot of letters behind their name, or be able to, because of the things they've accomplished, maybe be on a board of a company or do certain things, have extra power, right? But none of those things ultimately in of themselves make you happy and make you really fulfilled and all rounded as a person. Um, a quote from an article I love said the core of the hustle culture mentality is that if you work hard enough, you'll become successful. And the more successful you are, the more powerful you are. And I think while it's very true that if you work hard, you can become successful. I think success and power should not be the end all be all. And I think that's what we're saying, right? That's not what's going to make you completely fulfilled as a person, um, in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. And that's all.
Yeah. Another interesting statistic here, that we didn't talk much about. A lot of people may not be overworking at their main job, or they may be, but 25% of Americans also have a side job or a side gig, right? Something to bring in additional income, which I would argue in this economy, it's kind of necessary. Like, I feel like everybody has to have a side hustle at some point. And the article does go on to say that 46% of people who have side gigs, side jobs, said they do need it to pay their basic expenses. 25% said they needed to save for something specific. Maybe they want to save for a car, for a house. 24% to pay off debts and loans. So this goes back to the idea we discussed about not everybody hustling, participating in this hustle culture necessarily even wants to or is doing it by choice. Sometimes you have to, especially in this country. And while it's true before, especially with the economy at late, right? 10% work 15 to 20 hours at the side gig. So if you're working 40 hours a week minimum already, and then 15 to 20 hours at your side gig, like, how much time are you able to really have for yourself, for your family, for your friends, right? It can really, it's all connected, right? It can really bring down your physical and your mental health, um, which I think we're seeing happen in society, right?
Yeah, I think up until now, we've kind of spoken about hustle culture and more specifically dealing with hustle culture in a way that is very ideal, right? Obviously, we did bring up this idea a lot earlier, how not everyone is doing it just because they want to. But for the most part, we've been speaking about it in a way that's like, okay, like, we put ourselves in these situations that we need to alleviate ourselves. And it does take place in that way, but
Mm,
oftentimes, according to this statistic and statement, it also doesn't, right? Um, and that is something that, it is difficult to suggest mechanisms of dealing with it that um, involve the individual, right? It's very difficult because this person, it's like, okay, either I relax and let up a little bit and I like die, or
mhm,
like I don't have enough money to survive, or I keep doing it and I just barely keep my head above water. And
yeah,
unfortunately, many Americans are living in that situation.
those are the
Um,
choices they have to make. Yeah.
you know, and so that it's not easy. Like, you can't suggest a solution that's like, okay, just like take some time off and da da da, because
Yeah.
that person isn't thinking about that right now. Like, I'm sorry,
Mhm.
but they're thinking about how the bills are gonna get paid. Um, and excuse me, and I think that is something that all of us, young people especially, need to be thinking about, because in 5, 10, 20 years, we're gonna be the people at the top of the chain. Maybe not
Mm.
5 years, but maybe 20 years, 15 years, you know what I mean? We're gonna
Yeah.
be the people at the top of the chain. We're gonna be the people that, you know, hopefully have some sort of influence.
Yeah. In these
And
companies and stuff
yeah,
to
in these
make
companies
those
and in these industries.
cultural decisions. Yeah.
Right. And we need to be thinking about the common individual. We need to be
Mhm.
thinking about what they might be going through, right? Turning a profit is great, okay? But at what cost?
Yeah.
At what cost? And that kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier about understanding where you are in a situation and making time to serve other people. And also not only defining success as the amount of money that you have, but also how how involved you can get in your community and how well you can serve other people because
Mm.
these are the experiences that are going to shape how we who are going to be hopefully one day the individuals that have influence deal with people that are struggling to keep their heads afloat. Do you
Yeah.
see what I'm saying? The
Absolutely.
only reason, not the only reason, but a huge reason as to why this statistic is the case is because we have a system here in America that does not look out for the common individual. We
Mm.
have a system that allows people to suffer and struggle and barely financially and even emotionally be keeping their head above water, you know? So I
Yeah.
think that as young people who are just building our careers, we need to be sensitive to our own situations, to the situations of people around us as well. So when we do have place to speak, we can make a difference in these people's lives. We won't make it such that, they feel like they have to not they have to overwork themselves just to be able to keep their heads above water, so to speak, you know? I don't know, that's just my opinion.
And I think it was very well said. It's an excellent point. I think all you can really say to people who are hustling because they have to, right, is that we hope that they can put in the work now so that they won't have to be hustling like that in the future. You know, that like don't let this become your final lifestyle. But you may have to, to go that extra mile and make those sacrifices so that hopefully in the future your family, your kids won't have to have that, you know, those same struggles. Like once you get to that point, don't continue to overwork to reach that next thing, right? But by the end of the day, bills gotta get paid, so and that's the problem, like, it doesn't matter how much you go on and on about mental health, and we need time for ourselves. That mental health and self-care is not gonna pay the bills, unfortunately. Wish it could, but that is not the currency that we're dealing in, so it's something absolutely we have to keep in mind. Um, we talked about or we've kind of briefly mentioned how, a lot of people subscribe to hustle culture just to maybe they want to reach the goal, they want to reach that next level, but maybe it's not an absolute necessity, right? The article mentions that 23% of people report they're taking on side hustles for fun as a hobby, which sometimes a lot of times is great. Sometimes a side hustle or hobby, if it's something that you enjoy doing, it can be an outlet, it can be a stress reliever. I guess it just depends on how serious it becomes. Like if you become too focused on it being successful, especially monetarily, then it can become more like a job. So you want to keep those things fun, I would say. But it also mentions 11% doing side hustles for more experience. So that's something to benefit your main job, right? Your career. And 10% to grow their professional network. And again, while all these things are really great, we gotta weigh like, are those improvements and those benefits we're gonna see in our careers, or is that worth our mental state, our self being, right? And our lack of self-care, right?
Yeah, I think that there is nothing wrong with having a side hustle. I mean, I'm looking for a side hustle literally right now. I
Me
know a
too.
lot of people that I know a lot of people that, are, you know, making good money, in whatever side hustle that they're doing.
Mhm.
And there's nothing wrong with that, you know. I think that we're just more so speaking about when you allow it to get like a little bit too far.
Yeah.
just in the name of like making yourself look some type of way. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or using the side hustle or even like your main hustle, overwork. I guess what we've mostly been talking about is overworking yourself at your main hustle, but still, um, working really hard, or overworking yourself rather at your main hustle or the side hustle, that it begins to negatively impact your quality of life, right? I think it can be a really good thing to have a side hustle or some sort of job on the side, as long as it works within the bounds of your own health and what you can do, the good things that you can do within for yourself. Um,
Absolutely.
you
Yeah.
know, but once again, we're looking at people that are doing this not necessarily for fun as well, right?
Hmm.
11% of people are doing it for experience, and 10% are doing it to grow their professional network, right? And to be honest, again, we have been speaking about dealing with the toxic effects of hustle culture in a way that is more ideal.
Hmm.
Um, I think it would be disingenuous for us not to give attention to the idea that in a lot of industries, getting experiences is integral to being uh successful. Sorry,
Yeah.
to being successful in your career. I think one such field is the one that you're in, Noble. Software engineering. I'm so sorry, I'm tripping over my words. But software engineering, right? Or
Hmm.
computer science. I feel like I've heard a lot about that because obviously you're my brother and you're doing it. But I also have some of my friends that are doing it too. And the grind to get an internship is honestly crazy, like
Hmm.
there are people that are applying to, hundreds of internships every year, summer interns every single year, just so they have something to put on their resume.
Yeah.
So I think it's a great field. Like the work done there is really important. We are a computer run world today, so it's really important. It's a great career path too. Um, but these people that have chosen this, or you guys that have chosen this career path, it's almost as if it is a necessity to add a lot of things onto your resume.
Absolutely.
To
Yeah.
show recruiters that you do have the experience and the skill set necessary to succeed in that career path.
Hmm.
So I think it's important to look at hustling for necessity as a necessity from that lens as well, right? It's not always to keep your head above water financially. It's
Right.
also
That's
to
a good
make sure
point.
that you have a future
Hmm.
in the path that
Hmm.
you take too, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, there's a lot of reasons why people do it, honestly.
And in tech,
And
right?
it makes sense. It makes sense.
it doesn't it doesn't end after you graduate, right? To get a job, you go through the same process over and over again, basically, right? And it doesn't matter if you've been working for a year, 5 years, 10 years. You basically it's like you're going back to school. You got to review and study for the coding interviews and everything all over again, despite the experience you may or may not have already. So it definitely is tough, and it's really challenging, really competitive. More so now because of this post-pandemic world we're in, where hiring is at an all-time low. Companies are trying to tighten up, and they're going in hiring freezes. They're trying to be more careful about who they hire because they overhired during the pandemic. So now it's like you're competing with all kinds of people, right? The pool is so wide. And with AI and all these things that are sifting through your resumes, throwing your resumes in the trash electronically before human even sees it, it's you're up against a lot for sure. So there's that pressure to do anything you can to have extra stuff on your resume. Your degree is not enough anymore, which I'm sure many people can relate to in many different fields. Your degree is just it's just not enough anymore. Unless maybe you're in computer science, I would say the only difference is maybe if you're applying for a management position or something higher where maybe you're not coding like that, they probably go through a different process. But generally it really is hustle. So it's hard to be able to remove yourself from that. Like you said, it's almost a necessity when you have to subscribe to it to keep up. And then there's also the aspect of tech, like some other field as well, being a field that's always evolving and changing, right? you're always having to read and learn and educate yourself and put yourself in new, experiences, new opportunities because tech is changing and you don't want to be left behind when the next curve of technology comes. Right now, the next curve of technology is artificial intelligence, right? Generative AI, um, narrow AI, all these different applications, right? And these big machine learning models and language learning models and the statistics and all that stuff behind it, right? That's like the main thing now. And so, everybody's trying to get education in that area. That's one big one. Another big one is cloud computing and servers, right? A lot of people are trying to get certifications in that because companies like Amazon Web Services and Google Cloud are now the ones that are running the world. And they are so integral to all the internet services we use every day. So a lot of people are trying to learn more in that area. And then there's cybersecurity because of the increase of technology, crime and criminals are turning from traditional methods of crime to tech. So there's the importance to be able to secure your technology as well. So there's all these things going on that, as a tech professional, you want to make sure you're kind of, you're tapping into those opportunities and stuff to learn about because you don't want to be left behind, right? When you're going to get the next job. So I absolutely agree. There's definitely is definitely in many cases more of a requirement than maybe we like to admit. Um, in the article, they also mention I wanted to bring up quickly how many salaried employees feel that they need to overwork to get raises and promotions or even to avoid being laid off, right? Um, Depending on the industry you may be in, long hours may be expected or may seem necessary if you want to climb up that ladder corporate wise, or if you want to even just you know, make more money so that you can buy a house or send your kids to college or whatever it is, right? I know a friend told me that he's talked to people who worked at Amazon and how Amazon's not the only tech company that does this, but Amazon has a system that I don't remember what it's called, but basically they are constantly ranking people on every team um in different percentiles. I'm probably not going to explain it well, but basically there's a high percentile, the people who are achieving above and beyond, the people who are meeting expectations, and then the people who are below expectations. Now, every time they do a team review or evaluation, they have to put people in every category. So they can't just say, "Oh, everybody's doing good." So we're just going to put most people meets expectations and then the few high performers in the, exceeding expectations. So if it's like the culture there is so intense now that's like if you're not going above and beyond, you're gonna get not meeting expectations, and then you're in danger of being fired. So
This is at Amazon, right?
this is at Amazon, yeah. So with
I heard of another situation like this. Sorry to cut you off,
no,
but
you're
I
good.
want to like bring this up. I heard of another program like this also at Amazon. One of my friends was telling me about it. I don't remember what it was called. Maybe it's the same thing. This just might be a different end of it.
Hmm.
But he was telling me, and he's also going into comp sci as well. He was telling me that in the software engineering side of Amazon, there is a program. I don't remember what it was called, but there is a program that um makes it such that I think 15% of all the software engineering teams working at Amazon um are at risk of being essentially being on the chopping block. Every term, I don't know how long each term is, maybe it's a quarter, just like
Usually
your situation.
quarters, yeah.
Yeah,
Hmm.
um and it doesn't matter what you do, like eventually your team will end up there. And that I just feel like is an unhealthy amount of pressure because it's like if you do
Yeah,
one thing wrong, you and your entire team are gone.
yeah.
And it's
That I think is the same
15% of
program.
it might be
Yeah.
the same thing, but it's just so crazy to me. It's so crazy to me because it's like, why why would you put individuals through that sort of a pressure? You know what
Hmm.
I mean? And then imagine how much pressure there is on the supervisor of that
Hmm.
team too. And then
They're putting
this
pressure on
supervisor
their
can
team because there's
ex-
team pressure on them to make sure their team is
exactly.
delivering at X level. Yeah.
Exactly. They have to find
Hmm.
a way to deal with that pressure. So who are they going to take their stress out on? Their employees that are under them. So it's
Yeah.
honestly just a really, in my mind, unfair system. But life is also unfair. I think we can do something to change
Yeah.
this,
This can be
but
changed though. Yeah.
yeah, it can be changed. But
Yeah, I
I
think
think it's
that's the
just so
same.
crazy.
I
Must be the
think that's
same
the
thing.
same thing. I think there's just also an individual component as well. So you're also ranked individually, like amongst your team as well as the teams themselves. But yeah, you basically said what I was gonna say. Like, how are you supposed to be able to function like to your full capacity and like mentally? How are you supposed to be okay if at every point you're kind of worrying like, oh, are they gonna when this quarter ends, are they gonna, say that I'm eligible to be fired? Like it's not a healthy state to be in, and I'm pretty sure it's not only tech that has something like this. I would not be surprised if the business fields and the marketing fields and the other ones have a version of this as well. But it's things like that that maybe, like you said, when those of us 20, 30 years from now, when those of us are in maybe positions of power in corporations and such, maybe these are the things we need to look at because is it really making the company more productive? I would argue no. I don't really think it is. It's just cutting people for cutting's sake, you know? Um, but it's unfortunate because it cuts into your mental and your physical health. The article also mentions, the WHO did a study, the WHO, working at least 55 hours a week kills more than 745,000 people a year. That is a lot. Increases the risk of stroke by 35% and heart disease by 17%. And we know heart disease is one of the leading killers of people in America. So that's very serious, right? And then that's not even to bring in the mental health, the stress, the reduction of work-life balance, how it strains your friendships, right? Because if you're always working, it's going to affect your friendships and personal relationships, right? Some people end relationships because of, the lack of work-life balance, right? So it's all encompassing. It seems like such a minuscule thing when you start talking about it like an individual thing, but it's like it has so many repercussions throughout so many areas of our lives and of society as a whole.
Yeah, I mean, I think that part of this must be because, at least that this statistic specifically must be because that if you're overworking, you're probably not getting very good sleep. You're
Mm,
obviously not taking very good care of yourself.
yeah.
Um, and in my course of study, I've learned extensively about the importance of sleep, and I think we underestimate it, especially as students. Back to the all-nighter thing I was speaking about, but also in your professional life as well. Um, 55 hours a week is a much lower threshold than I thought. Would be very dangerous. And I think
Yeah.
it
It
has to
doesn't
do
sound
with
like that
sleep.
much.
Like sleeping does not make you lazy, guys. Like it definitely doesn't. There's everything in moderation, obviously, but please be getting enough sleep. Um, because I don't, you literally will not be able to survive without it. Whatever you're working towards now, if you're not taking care of yourself and specifically getting enough sleep, you won't be really able to enjoy that later on. So, you
Mm,
know, don't do too much in terms of losing sleep for
absolutely. It's
sure.
important. The sleep debt is
Um,
real.
did you read The Poor Sleep Debt is Real and You'll Never Catch Up? That's the crazy thing
Yeah.
to me. So, but the last sentence of this stat that you just read about
Mm,
by the WHO,
yeah.
um, it says their report asserts that working too much increases the risk of a stroke by 35% and heart disease by 17%.
Yeah, that's what I
And
mentioned
that's like
earlier. Yeah.
scary to me because I feel like most people know what that entails. Most
Mhm.
people know what those two situations entail. Um, and for me, I'm like, okay, if someone was telling you that, every time you walk into a mall, a given mall, right,
Mhm.
the chances of you passing away increase by 35% every
Yeah.
time you walk into that mall. Would you keep going into that mall?
Mm,
No, you would probably find a different one to go to, right? And
yeah.
same thing with the heart, 17%, right? You would probably, because eventually that chance is going to reach 100,
Yeah.
eventually. And then there you go. But I think that because it's something that work and professional life is something we prioritize so much,
Mhm.
we don't think of it in that same way. Um, and that's something that I've honestly learned how to mitigate that by making examples in my head like that, right? Thinking of something that is like elementary or trivial, like going to a mall, right?
Hmm.
And applying the same numbers to that situation and seeing how unreasonable it actually sounds, right? Because I think if a lot of people knew about this statistic, they probably would um understand that this is a much bigger issue than you might initially think, you know?
Absolutely. Yeah. Something to think about for sure. So I think if you've been listening to our podcast for a while now, I think something you'll realize is that we always, when we talk about a problem, we always like to discuss solutions, right? We don't want to just present a problem, complain about it, and not go anywhere with it. So we want to talk about the efforts that people have made or that have been suggested that we could make to end hustle culture, or at least bring it more to a healthy level. Um, the article mentioned some things, and then I added some things as well that I have read about. Working from home has been mentioned as a big one. Obviously, one of the few blessings of the COVID-19 pandemic has been the ability for people in certain fields to be able to work from home, forced to work from home. But as a result, people have realized, and studies do show that people are generally more productive working from home. They're allowed to have a more rounded life. They're actually more able to get more done for their company, and the companies do just as well. People save a lot of time commuting to and from work. I think we don't actually, because we're so used to doing it, especially before the pandemic, we don't actually think about how much time you waste in a day driving to and from work, especially if you live in a major city or really a city in general, anything with that kind of urban setup. You waste a lot of time, not just sitting in traffic, but with stoplights and everything, you know, that you could be working. And when you think of like, okay, in a week, you need to get this much work done, think about maybe if you had an additional hour every day, that time you're using commuting back and forth to work, maybe you could get that work done a day earlier and then work on something else or then take a break. So working from home has been hailed as definitely something that we should push more. Obviously, we're seeing that corporations, now that the pandemic has kind of become something more endemic, something that we're living with now, and it's not at the height that it used to be. We're seeing that corporations now are trying to reduce it as much as possible because they want to keep people in the office. Some companies, I think they just want to control people. Some, need to justify that, all the bills they're paying for the expensive office space that either they built or they're renting. So a lot of corporations now are kind of pushing back on it, especially in tech. We're seeing it a lot. This come back to the office type of thing. And so I think we gotta push back, especially I think our generation, Generation Z, and like millennials, those of us who are newer ish to the workforce, we need to be able to push back and kind of challenge that push to get people back in the office full time. Because is it actually improving our productivity? It depends. I mean, in some ways, it is better to be in the office to be able to collaborate with people in person. Sometimes that helps improve productivity, but we've seen with the rise of Zoom and a lot of technology that a lot of that productivity still can be done at home. And I don't know about you, Eden, from just like, you know, your experiences with work in general, but sometimes I find that you can be more unproductive in the office sometimes because you're around people, you take a break and you talk to them and you're like, "Oh, let me go get a drink. Let me get a snack." People get coffee. Whereas when you're at home, you just lock in and do the work. You take the break when you need. And I think we don't talk about that. Like sometimes people talk a lot in the office. Like we do like get distracted. Sometimes I'll be working and then somebody will be, "Oh, come, we're having a celebration for this or we're doing this little thing. Can you come take this picture?" Like you have those typical interruptions, which there's nothing wrong with that. But it's a reminder that sometimes the whole in-office work that so many companies are hailing as, "Oh, this is the holy grail of productivity," you know? Elon Musk is saying things like, "Oh, nobody's ever accomplished anything serious working from home," like, stuff like that. When it's like, in-office work isn't always necessarily the most productive too, there's other factors that play into that. Um, So we got to acknowledge that. I don't know. How do you feel eating about working from home in general versus going to your place of employment?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I don't really have much experience working in an office. The job, the primary job that I've had since I've been in college has been one that I work largely virtually. So I
Mm,
feel like I can't speak too much towards that. I will say that I think it's interesting because earlier we were talking about home being a place of relaxation, and a place that you kind of associate with de-stressing. But I also do understand where you're coming from, where many other people are coming from when they talk about working from home, because it's more likely that you can do things by your own schedule. You can be there for your family. You can be there. Um, you could be in a place that you feel more comfortable, and I feel like that can possibly lead to productivity. I don't think that this idea that you can't really be productive from home is has too much validity has that much validity to it, um, just because people have been working from home for quite a while now, for at least a couple of years now, um, and clearly everything is still working,
mhm.
you know what I mean? So, don't know how true that actually is.
Yeah.
Um, Honestly, for me, the field that I'm going into, I probably won't be able to work from home
Right.
much. And frankly, I'm fine with that because I like being with people. I think I'm a people person for the most part. Um, so I'm fine with that. You know what I mean? But I also know that there's a lot of people that probably would like the opportunity to work from home. I
Yeah.
had a position over this past summer where I worked from home actually, and that was a good experience too. Um, I was still able to get everything done that I needed to get done, and I feel like I had a lot of mobility as well, right? Um, so frankly, I don't see too much wrong with it. That's just my personal opinion. I don't really have statistics or anything to support it, or a lot of experience even working at home to support it,
Mhm.
but I don't really see that much wrong with it. I think folks can still be somewhat productive while being in an environment that doesn't stress them out as much as maybe the workplace environment. So yeah, I think those are my thoughts. I wish I had more to give you about this, but because of my limited experience in working inside and outside of a corporate space, um,
Yeah.
I don't really have that much of a mind.
And
So
that's fair. It's
yeah.
different depending on, what field you're going to be in. But I will say I've always felt like it's a great option too for parents, right? Parents don't really get to be involved in their children's lives as much these days when they're working all the time. And as a parent, you want to be able to know what's going on with your children at school and stuff, and even just to be able to spend time with them. So I feel like it's such a game changer for parents, especially with parents with young kids, to be able to still kind of be at home when the kids come home from school and stuff like that, to be more connected to their kids. Um, I will say there are downsides. Obviously, we talked about kind of wanting to separate home and work, which can be tricky if you work from home. The article did mention that sometimes it can lead to more burnout because people are more productive from home generally. And so as a result, you're working more, you're working harder. Sometimes people can still get burnout. So there are downsides, but I think overall it's a wonderful thing, especially if you live in a city with a lot of traffic. I think the commuting time is a big thing that it really can help. So that's one big effort, obviously, that we've seen many people, many companies push for. The other big one is this idea of the 4-day work week, which has been getting more and more popular. And some schools are also trying to implement 4-day instructional weeks as well. It's become very popular in Europe. Some European countries and companies have tried it and they've already seen positive outcomes, including increased productivity, the quality of work improving, and just employees feeling better overall. I don't have the article or the source, but I remember reading an article a week or two ago about a company in Europe who said they said they started it as a pilot 4-day work weeks and they said they're never going back to 5-day work weeks. It's just so much better in every way. And I think there's this thing where especially American employers feel that 4-day work weeks are only going to benefit the employees and not them, so they don't wanna do it. But preliminary studies are showing that it benefits everybody. And the big, disclaimer with this is 4-day work week does not mean 4 days worth of pay. You still are getting 5 days worth of pay, right? Because if you are only working for 4 days and now getting 1 day less of pay, it defeats the whole purpose, right? Because then you gotta go get your side hustle, do all that so you can make your bills. And I think that's the main reason probably that we haven't seen it in America, because companies are greedy and they don't want to pay us the same money they've been paying us, but us working less. They don't wanna do it. But the only way it's gonna work realistically is if that is the case. So I think that has been kind of the struggle. Obviously, there's no legislation or anything in America yet that's really, you know, said, okay, we're going to go ahead with this, but they technically don't really need legislation to do it. There's no legislation preventing it either. So it's something that I think more corporations should explore, you know? So a lot of times they'll work some work Monday through Thursday and they have Friday off. So they have a nice long weekend. And some people work Tuesday through Friday and have Monday off. So they're able to start their work better. But it is something to investigate. I mean, I think we've seen people prefer in general with the medical field, with people who typically work 3 12-hour shifts. If you talk to a lot of them, they'll say, yeah, 3 12-hour shifts are hell, but I love having the rest of the week to do whatever I want. So it's like, it's not even a new concept, but because we're so ingrained in the 40-hour work week system that was designed, I think, in the mid 1900s, I think it was 1970s, around there. I think America, we struggle with getting out of habits in this country. We just like doing the same thing over and over, right?
And I think it's a really good point that you bring up about how maybe it hasn't been adopted or given much thought here in America because companies or corporations feel like um it will help their employees and not like the people at the top, right? And for me, I think that's a little frustrating that that's part of the reasoning as to why it hasn't been given that much or it hasn't been given like there's not that much traction is what I'm trying to say. Here. It's frustrating because people at the tops of corporations will make decisions that benefit themselves but don't benefit their employees, even hurt their employees all the time. All the time. Um and the one chance that they have to make a decision that will help out the employees and they won't be able to help themselves out just once, they don't want to take it, and that's frustrating because it's like it just shows that a lot of companies don't really value their workers. They don't value their employees that much.
Mm,
Um Now shift work, the three 12-hour shifts, um 12 hours is still a long time obviously, but
mhm,
it's still I think, like, it's one good thing that you can do, especially if you're going into nursing. I know it's really big in nursing specifically. It's really good because you have a lot of time off, just like you're saying. For a very long time when we were growing up, um, my mom specifically used to do, 36 hours a week, so, 3 12-hour shifts. And as we got older, she actually started working more, um 'cause I feel like there was less of a need for her to, like, be at home.
and
Honestly,
more
same with my
bills to
dad.
pay.
Yeah, and more bills to pay, you
College and
know?
all.
Yes. Um, but especially in our formative years, it was really nice having her and, um, my dad being around quite a bit,
Mhm,
um, you know? So, yeah, I do think that, it's it's very good. It's very good is what I'm trying to say. As for the 4-day work week specifically, um, I mean, it's no doubt that like there is absolutely no doubt that having adequate rest increases productivity like by a lot. There is scientific bases for that. There are scientific bases for that. Like there's no doubt in my mind or in general
mm,
that having adequate rest can boost productivity. And so I think that giving a whole day more of rest can it honestly has the potential to be a lot better than worse. I will say that, this one company in Europe saying that, oh, we're not going back to the 5-day work week. Like, it sounds great, but it's also just one company, right? So that's like a really small sample size. And I think it's something that should be adopted more in like beta first. If that makes sense. Like, it should be adopted more to like test out to see if it actually really really works or if that's more so an isolated incident. But I do think that based on what we know about sleep, rest, and restorative practices, that it has the potential to be very, very, very beneficial. And I think it's something that it should be there should be given more attention to it, in my honest opinion.
Yes. Yeah, of course. Yeah. That particular article was just about one company, but they are not the only company that has tried it and reported positive results. But it's definitely
Okay, I see.
something we can't just switch to right away for sure. It has to be
Yeah.
companies are going to have to test drive it for a little bit and see because there could be other downsides specific to a certain company for sure. And especially something like a school and education, they're also going to have to really test drive it because it could have inadvertent side effects as well. I do feel like it would be easiest for colleges to um implement a 4-day work week. I feel like they're not gonna have they have less things to think about than a business. And I feel like there's also less pressure on professors than there are in K through 12 education. I think K through 12 education, it would be very hard for them to implement it because their teachers are expected to teach so much in so little time because the kids have to be at a certain um level so they can take their EOGs and like meet the standards. So for K through 12 to do it, it's probably going to take a lot of smart thinking, but I think a lot of colleges could pull it off. Maybe if they took some time and they really, worked it. It might mean they have to start classes a few days earlier or something like that to give the professors some wiggle room. But I think if you start classes like max a week earlier, but you didn't have class on Friday ever, I think most students would go for that. Like I think they would. So it is definitely something to think about for sure. Last point here, and then we're gonna wrap up this conversation, was when I added about Generation Z, which is our generation. For context, Generation Z is represented by people born from 1997 to roughly 2012. Generations are tricky because there's rarely set years. So some people will say 1996 to 2010. Some people will say 1998 to 2013. Like there isn't a set one, but generally they agree late 90s to early 2010s is Generation Z. And Generation Z obviously was exposed to technology. We grew up with technology, but also we've seen a lot of technology evolve and change. So we grew up a lot of us grew up before smartphones existed, and then we've seen smartphones change, right? We grew up with like CDs and cassettes, and then we've seen the switch to streaming. So we're a very unique generation. Um, our generation has kind of had an emphasis on the importance of work-life balance and self-care. A lot of people are always speaking up about it, and so as a result, I feel like a lot of us have been pushing back against hustle culture, despite still having to participate it, especially depending on what fields and stuff we're going to. But I think we can all say we see that there is this rise amongst our generation of this emphasis in doing what is best for you and taking care of yourself and not slaving away for a corporation. Unfortunately, some people don't like that, especially in the work field. A lot of executives and hiring managers have criticized Generation Z and said that they're lazy. Same with millennials as well. They said the same thing with millennials that they're lazy. They don't want to work. They don't want to put in the hard work. But it is going to show that I think our culture is changing and hopefully society can change for the better as a result. You may have heard of quiet quitting, which is this idea of just doing, I don't want to say the bare minimum because it's not doing absolutely nothing, but it's like doing the work you have to do and not taking on anything else just to impress, right? Or just to go the extra mile so that you'll be looked. It's just doing your job that you are paid for, right? Which is very popular now with the young generations because people are realizing these corporations will take you for a ride, and they don't really care about your well-being. They want to get the most work out of you, and they're not going to pay you extra to do it. So while we've seen a lot of companies and these executives and stuff criticize that, but it has roots in a good thing, I think. And it's the only way we're going to be able to kind of reframe our, as a society, our relationship with work and school and with hustling. So I think it's something that we should definitely embrace. Of course, everything in balance and moderation. I think we've said it many times, right? We're not calling for being lazy or not working hard or even not making sacrifices, because sometimes you have to make sacrifices to succeed, to get where you want to be. But everything in moderation, everything in balance, and nothing should be, ideally, should be at the expense of your mental health and your physical health and well-being. So hopefully, as we enter this new year, that's something we can all keep in mind and seek to, improve in that area of our lives. Um, but thank you all for listening. Any last comments before we close?
I guess just generally, um, that if you are not in a position where you feel like you have to overwork yourself, just a reminder to take care of yourself.
Yeah.
And a statement um to remind yourself that it's not wrong to take breaks within reason, you know. And also to be content with where you're at as well. I guess that kind of goes back to what we were speaking about
Yeah.
closer to the beginning. Um, but all that is very important because burnout is way more common than we would like to give it credit for.
Yeah.
Um, I know that all of us have goals that we would love to accomplish. And I think it's important that you remind yourself that you will make it there and one day off because you're in a place where you really just cannot work or even just making sure that you have adequate rest is not going to derail your entire future. It is okay to take a break, you know. Um yeah, I feel like that's where I am with with this entire conversation.
Yeah. Me too. May God help us. May God help everyone, because obviously the world we live in today, it's not easy. It's not easy. So many people are struggling, but hopefully this year we can all kind of seek and find that work-life balance and take care of ourselves, for sure. So on that note, thank you all for listening to this extra long episode. We hope that you this at least gave you something maybe to think about. And maybe will spark some discussion amongst your peers, your friends, your family about hustle culture. Um, Please do feel free to let us know in the comments of the places that this posted your thoughts, and all our information is in the description as usual, and this article is also in the description as well. I think it's a great read. But for now, thank you all for listening, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.